Welcome to the Association's Futures Podcast, brought to you by Association Activision. We ask you to join us to discuss the future of the Association's community. How can we build and focus on the many futures we will see during these disruptive times? Let's get started with today's guest.
Welcome back to the Association Futures Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Butera. Today, I am delighted to have a returning guest, Jeff De Cagna, Executive Advisor for Foresight First LLC, and one of the most future-focused voices in our association community. Jeff has joined us before to share insights on the evolving landscape of association governance, and I'm excited focusing on the future of association boards, FAB Community Dialogue Report, for which Jeff serves as the curator and editor. The FAB report is a powerful piece of work that challenges us to rethink how boards can lead with greater clarity, courage, and capacity in today's turbulent environment. If you've seen Jeff's writing or his posts on LinkedIn, you know his report isn't just a snapshot. It's a call for action. Jeff, welcome back to the Association Futures Podcast.
Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all the contributions that you made to the FAB Community Dialogue Report over the last year. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk about it with you.
Well, it's been a great pleasure of mine to work with you, Jeff. So, Jeff, let's get started right away. What makes you most proud about the FAB report?
It's a great question. I'm glad we're starting there because I am very proud of all of the work that went into this with the more than 370 contributors we had to this process over the last year. This started really back in with a conversation with my partners on this, Remembers, back in the fall of 23. And ultimately, we started the work on the FAB Community Dialogue in the summer of 2024, going into ASA 24 in Cleveland last year. And that's where we really launched this and started to get people involved. So what makes me proud about it is that we've worked on this for such a long time. It has been a team effort. It has been a truly collaborative effort. We called it the Community Dialogue because we wanted to involve as many different voices from across our community as possible. And we've had many voices, certainly from the U.S. Association community, but also outside of the U.S. as well. And we invited all stakeholders to have a voice in this project. So we've certainly had board members and board officers and chief staff executives and senior staff contributors, but we've also had young people and people all across, consultants like yourself and others, who all have a stake in what happens with our boards. So I'm very proud that this has been a very inclusive effort. It's been a collaborative effort among everyone involved in the project, and it is something that I'm very excited that we were able to really bring to fruition. We always said we wanted to release the report in July of 2025, just ahead of ASA 25 in Los Angeles. We've done that, and now the next step in our process begins.
Well, Jeff, what promoted the creation of the FAB report at this point in time? And was there what we would call a tipping point in the association space that made this so urgent?
Well, I think that, as I said, we started this conversation, Patrick Dorsey from what was then known as Impexium and I began this conversation. They rebranded to Remembers earlier this year. And a conversation started about what can we do to create more useful, beneficial content for association boards and senior decision makers. And we eventually got to the place of saying, let's have this community dialogue. And I think for me, what prompted the creation was that we really needed to have this conversation about what's happening with association boards. And I think really in many ways, the tipping point, if there was one to sort of put it in those terms, came while we were doing it, which is how we have seen the need for adaptation within our organizations, certainly within the last 8 months, as we've had a change in dynamics in our political environment and policy environment. But even before then, with the arrival of artificial intelligence in full force and other issues that are affecting our community, I think what we're recognizing is the importance of having a different discussion about what is going to be required of our boards, what's required of them today, and what will be required of them as we move through the rest of this decade into the 2030s. So I do view this as both important and urgent, that the report be something that we talk about in our community and take action on as well.
So what do you see as the most important takeaways from the FAB report?
Well, I mean, the report contains 9 recommendations, which I know we're going to talk about, at least some of them during our conversation. So I'll save that for as we move forward. But I think for me, the takeaways, the recommendations themselves are takeaways, and there are questions in there in the report. There are next practices in there. There's a examination of orthodox beliefs. So there's lots of substance for readers of the report to take away for board officers and directors and chief staff executives and others who are involved in board work. But I think the big takeaways for me are really 3 things. One, echoing what I just said a moment ago, we must shift the dynamics of what's happening with our boards. Our boards must be able to elevate their performance and rise to the occasion of what our organizations and our community is facing in 2025 and for the remainder of this decade. We are facing urgent issues, important, significant challenges that require board attention at the highest level, required effective board decision-making, effective board stewardship, as we write about in the report. So that is one thing. I think the second thing is a recognition that this can't be an us versus them approach. The theme that cuts across the entirety of the report is the idea that we must do this together, that boards must work with their chief staff executives, they must work with staff, other contributors must work with the board, that the whole approach to the way that we're going to elevate capable stewardship of our boards is that it must be a collaborative approach. We must bring about greater solidarity and greater unity in the approach that we take to building board capacity for the future. It certainly belongs in large measure to boards themselves to take on personal responsibility and to perform at a higher level. That's certainly their responsibility in a specific way, but they can't do it alone, and nor should they. And so we need to help our boards be as effective as possible in a collaborative way, in a way where we are building a sense of solidarity and shared responsibility to one another. And I think, the final thing that I think about with this report is that we have it within our ability to design this in a way that makes sense, which is why we included next practices instead of recommending specific actions. Each section of the report challenges our community or boards themselves or chief staff executives and their teams and other voluntary governing contributors to take certain actions to sort of pursue this in a specific way. But we don't prescribe, you must do this. Instead, we offer next practices in this report that are designed to help boards think differently, to challenge orthodoxy, and to move beyond orthodoxy, think and act beyond it, and to be able to adapt and adopt those next practices to their purposes. So they're really designing the most effective approach to governing that they possibly can. So for me, the takeaways beyond the 9 recommendations are those cross-cutting ideas of the importance of action right now, the need for an approach that is grounded in solidarity to help the board be successful, and the capacity to design this using next practices, and just the whole idea of next practices, not just the 18 that we include in the report, but the idea that you can design practices that will facilitate more effective, more appropriate board stewardship given the dynamics of the environment we're in.
We're going to get into more specifics in a little bit, but before we do that, Jeff, were there any findings in the report that surprised you, either in terms of that urgency that you mentioned, or how boards are currently addressing them?
I think what surprised me, and I talked about this in the launch webinar at the end of July, is how quickly the community dialogue, and I think of the community dialogue as all of us who were involved as sort of like a living entity, how quickly we came to a place of agreeing that stewardship was the way that boards should be viewing themselves, not just in the future, but now. And that was a surprise to me. Not that there was a belief in that, but that we got there so quickly and with relative ease. I thought that was something we would have to really talk more about and kind of navigate that I thought there'd be a lot more difference of opinion on that. And there certainly were people with different views. But broadly speaking, we came to an agreement on that, I think, pretty quickly. And that really shaped the conversation throughout the remaining time. That, as I said, that we came to it quickly, and by that I mean very early on in the process, probably last fall, as we began our conversations, as we went into September and October, we got to a place of agreement on that, and then that other conversations unfolded as a result of reaching that agreement in a different way than I had expected. I also think that what became clear very quickly as well is the need for us to, as I said during the launch webinar at the end of July, associations have really got to get out of the elections business. There is a need to move beyond electoral composition of our boards. There is a need to move beyond something that's not only electoral, but that also imposes geographic limitations. We've really got to get to a place where we're asking a different question, and that question needs to be, who are whatever the number is for an individual board, and we don't really talk about the issue of board size very much in the report, mostly because it did not surface as a significant issue with regard to performance, although different people have different views. We do have something in the next practices section on that. But whatever the number of directors is and officers is for a board, how do we get the best people at the table, the people best prepared to make tough decisions, the people best prepared to accept stewardship as their focus, to shift their attention toward that. And so I think that for me, the focus on stewardship and the need for us to get out of the elections business once and for all and move to more equitable and more capacity-oriented ways of composing boards, they weren't necessarily surprises, but the fact that they were so strong in our conversation and represent a fundamental shift away from what so many boards are doing right now. I think those were two things that stand out for me as being significant in our process that really shaped the rest of our conversations.
You know, you were one of the early practitioners of Foresight and promoter of Foresight. So what role should Foresight play in the shaping of governance practices for tomorrow's boards?
Well, thank you for that. Certainly, a lot of us have been involved in the work of Foresight for a while now, and I value it greatly in the work that I have done even before my company became known as Foresight First in 2017. Even when I was doing innovation work, there was obviously a focus on future. So I appreciate that. But again, it's been something that a lot of us in the community have valued, including yourself, of course. And I think that, for the purposes of our report, we were very clear. This is recommendation number 2, that boards must focus their attention on foresight. And in the report, we say very clearly that the time for experimentation, quote unquote, with foresight is over. This is now the work of boards, and really should have been for this entire time. But we are at a point now where we must stop viewing this as something that we do a little bit of when it's convenient, and we do it at an offsite. This is now the central work of our boards. As we write about in the report, boards are human systems that are navigating human systems into a very challenging future. And fundamental to that stewardship responsibility is the importance of foresight, the capacity to learn with the future, to undertake the intentional learning required to be able to anticipate and prepare for the future. And there is no more important work really for our boards to undertake than that. Obviously, they have other responsibilities. Those responsibilities must be fulfilled, but perhaps, and certainly I think there are other ways to fulfill some of the activities that we have generally put on board agendas. We need to free up board attention. We need to free up board focus on what is happening in the environment and how they will steward the organizations through the challenges of today and into the future. So there's simply no question that the association boards of the rest of the 2020s and into the 2030s must be focused on the importance of foresight. I have argued throughout my career these last 10 plus years that boards have a duty of foresight, and they really should be embracing that. And I think our report really reaffirms the important role that the capacity for foresight, the work of foresight, and making it a consistent practice is essential for our boards to be effective stewards in this environment.
So how should association stakeholders take action on the FAB report, and take a few extra moments to discuss the word stakeholder as in the context of the report?
So stakeholders are literally what the term, I think, might imply, which is it's really everyone who has a stake in the success and the long-term viability and impact of our organization. So that is certainly people serving on boards today, but it's also anyone who's thinking they might be serving on an association board in the future. It's always important to think about that there are boards of the past, which of course we want to honor their contributions. And the best way we can do that is by making sure our organizations continue to move forward and are thrivable in this environment. We have the board of the present, which is everyone who is currently seated, but then we also need to think about the boards of the future and what message are we sending to those boards by the way actions are taken. So it's certainly directors and officers of today and tomorrow. It's the chief staff executives and everyone working directly with the board, but it's also all the members and partners and others who are the beneficiaries of working with the association. Everyone has a stake in the success of our boards, and therefore they have a stake in how the report is used as a platform for trying to address what's happening with our boards today and elevating their performance. So I think in terms of how they should take action, I think everyone in the community should read the report, and everyone in the community should look at the questions, look at the orthodox beliefs, look at the next practices, and think about where can they make a difference on those conversations. How can they initiate an urgent conversation, important conversation, a focused conversation on board performance? We say in the report very clearly, it actually appears twice in the report. It appears in my introduction, and it appears on the summary of recommendations presentation that's in the report. We understand that not all the recommendations are going to apply equally to every organization. We also know that not everyone will agree with every recommendation. And as part of our process, and I probably should have said this earlier when you asked me about what made me most proud, what made me most proud, and it relates to this, is that we never said that everyone would have to come out of this process agreeing with everything that appeared in the report. We understand that people have different views. What we hope is that the report provides a basis for action, and that people can look at that and say, okay, well, I maybe see it a little differently, but let's use this as a basis for having a different conversation that leads us toward taking action. So I hope that every stakeholder is going to read the report. It's a very quick read. We try to keep it as short as possible because we know that sometimes it can be a challenge in today's environment to focus our attention on a very long document. So we try to keep it as manageable as possible for reading and to be able to use. And so, look at it and ask the question, what can I do in my role as a stakeholder in an association I work for or work with or serve on the board for, or that I'm a partner for in some way? How can I use this to initiate a discussion about where our board needs to go? And I fully expect, as there always is when recommendations are made and ideas are advanced, that there's going to be some resistance to some of the issues that we raise. There's going to be some resistance to the identification of orthodox beliefs. There's going to be some resistance to the challenges that we issue to the association community, to boards themselves, and to chief staff executives and other contributors. But I hope that what we can do is set aside the resistance for the greater good. And the greater good is that we need our boards to be as strong as possible. And we are confident that our report provides 9 recommendations and ways of thinking that will lead our boards to be better stewards, more effective stewards, that are capable of really sharing the burden, because I think one of the big challenges is that right now our chief staff executives, by and large, maybe not every organization, but on balance across the community, are shouldering a lot more burden for what's been going on in the organizations than our boards. And our boards need to step up and meet the moment and be truly and fully supportive, not just of their chief staff executives, but of their organizations, to say, this is our responsibility. We are the primary stewards. We need to take this as seriously as possible. And the report challenges them to do just that.
So, Jeff, if you were advising a board chair or a CEO once they've read the report, what would be the very first step that you might suggest that they take?
Well, let me answer it a little differently for each kind of officer that you've mentioned, because I think that if I were, and speaking as someone who has been a board chair and has been a board director, currently serving as a director for a privately held company, I think if you're a board chair or if you're serving on a board, I would look very carefully at recommendations 4, 5, and 6, right? And particularly 5 and 6, because recommendation 5 is really challenging board presiding officers, which is the term we use to cover all titles, chair, president, or anything else that might exist out there, to take personal responsibility for the performance of the board. There is no one person in the association who is more responsible for board performance than the presiding officer. So if that's your role, then you should read recommendation number 5, read recommendation number 6, read the rest of the report, and then say, I'm taking responsibility for making sure that our board is performing at the highest possible level, just as our CEO is taking responsibility for the highest possible level of staff performance. So I would start there, start with yourself, and then work with your peers to challenge them to take their personal responsibility, which is recommendation 6, to say, you've got to elevate your performance. This is not a ceremonial position. It is not a decorative position. It is important decision-making role in the organization, important stewardship role in the organization. So I would start there, and then I would work my way into other aspects of the report. For the CEO, or chief staff executive, which is the term we use in the report to cover all titles, I would say look at recommendation number 7, right, which is all about the idea of establishing a board and chief staff executive relationship that is characterized by interdependence. And I want to make sure that everyone understands what we mean by that, because we do have another recommendation in the report about board staff partnership. That's recommendation number 4. But we see the relationships. Clearly, there is a need for overall board staff partnership, and boards should see their staff partners as critical contributors to their work. And as we say in the report, boards rely upon, there's information and support and assistance that comes from staff partners that without which they could not function as a board. We also want to, it's not an either or, it's a both and. While we're also thinking about board staff partnership in the broader sense, we want to focus in also on the very important relationship between boards and their chief staff executives, and this idea that they must function interdependently in their roles. There's no one person in the association who has more connection and more involvement with the board than the chief staff executive. And so the chief staff executive relies upon a much higher level of support from the board than maybe other staff do. And so it's important for that relationship to work toward interdependence, where they really realize that they rely very heavily on each other, and that their interdependent connection is one that strengthens the association, strengthens the board's ability to perform, it strengthens the chief staff executive's ability to perform. And this is not about saying we always have to check in with each other and that sort of thing. Interdependence is a higher level of relationship that we think of as very consistent with the idea of overall stewardship approach on behalf of the board. So I think chief staff executives should be thinking about how can they work toward that kind of interdependent relationship with their boards, and boards should be supporting them in that regard. And it goes back to something I said earlier, which is we can't ask our chief staff executives to continue to carry all of this burden on their shoulders, because it is becoming an issue of physical and mental well-being for our chief staff executives. They are burned out, they are exhausted. And I know the same thing is true for many boards. So the best way to approach it is to support one another interdependently, rather than seeing it as something that, in the worst cases, is adversarial, right, or antagonistic, which we cannot have, right? It's so destabilizing to our organizations to have that antagonism or adversarial relationship between boards and chief staff executives. So this is really about shifting that conversation, shifting that relationship 180 degrees opposite from the idea that we have to be somehow in conflict with each other. And again, that's not in every organization, but we know that dynamic exists. So we have to move it the other way. We really have to get down to how can we operate interdependently? And it's not necessarily about everyone liking each other, right? Relationships can be cooperative and collaborative without necessarily being friendly. And friendly is a bonus and friendly is a plus for sure. But we need to keep our focus on the primary reason why everyone is there, and that is to steward the organization into the future. And I believe that board chairs, presiding officers, and chief staff executives can find ways to work together to get toward interdependence that enables what they each need to do to make our associations successful and able to move forward in this very challenging time.
Well, the FAB report clearly puts forward what we can call future-facing recommendations. So how can boards evaluate whether they're making progress on those recommendations?
So, yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because I know that a lot of people will say, well, how will you measure this? And I would say you're probably not going to measure it, but you can evaluate it. And I think the best way to evaluate it is, do you see a qualitative difference in what your board is talking about, how your board is talking about things, how people are showing up for meetings, how people are participating in conversations, how decisions get made? I think when you start looking at these recommendations and start making adjustments based on the recommendations, certainly, for example, start with recommendation 1 and shift the focus away from the leadership-centric mindset that seems to exist in so many boards toward a stewardship mindset where the focus is much more on, are we leaving it better than how we found it for our stakeholders and successors? And are we stewarding it effectively, given those challenges of recognizing that boards are temporary occupants in their positions, and so therefore they need to change their mindset for what they're doing, challenging orthodoxy, embracing foresight, changing the composition of the board, taking personal responsibility for performance, working with staff in more of a partnership way. As you are doing all of these things, those are the elements of the first 6 recommendations, and you can keep going for all 9, you will see a qualitative difference in what's happening in the board. A qualitative difference in the quality of conversation, the quality of participation, the nature of the relationships will change, and the next practices that are contained in the report can help facilitate that. So I think it's an evaluation process, an assessment of our board. Is board work changing? Is board participation changing? Board preparation changing? And are the conversations changing? And are the decisions being made changing? That's really what you have to focus on. It's more of a qualitative way of evaluating or assessing the progress on these. And I think that the best advice I would give on that is for everyone involved. And again, this has to be a collaborative endeavor built on the idea that we're all working toward the same outcome of effective board stewardship. Is, how can we find ways to integrate various aspects of the report's ideas and challenging the orthodoxies and shifting our thinking into every aspect of what we do, not just at the board level, but at the committee level, in the way staff works with committees, works with the board, prepares material. We talk about board-ready information, board-ready practice for CXOs, for senior level people as well. So how can we use a lot of these different approaches and practices to fundamentally alter the direction of what our boards are doing, what their work looks like, and how those conversations happen? So I would look for more qualitative assessment of changes over a period of time, and I would ask everyone who reads the report to say, okay, this we're approaching the last few months of 2025. Where might we want to get to in the next 6 months, so that by the end of the first quarter of the next calendar year, the end of March, say of 2026, how much progress can we make? Can we make on this? And what would we be looking for in terms of a qualitative difference in the approach of our meetings? So that's what I would advise. And anyone who has questions is certainly welcome to reach out to me. I'm at Jeff at foresightfirst.io, and I'm happy to provide any advice or guidance that anyone might want to seek to be able to help them determine what's the best way to approach the adoption of these recommendations.
Jeff, we're all familiar with that old saw, we live in interesting times. So, what role do you see our associations playing in shaping not just their own industry, but society at large through stronger governance?
Yeah, it's again a very important question, and one that I have been thinking about, in a variety of ways, and was in my mind as I was working on the report, because I think certainly, we know that many industries and professions are in turmoil right now. I think there's just really no other way to say it. I mean, when you look at what's happening in healthcare, higher education, in other sectors, you see a lot of disruption happening there, a lot of chaos. And unfortunately, those are the words that keep coming up. I monitor, as you know, Michael, I monitor a lot of information for my work. And unfortunately, the words that keep coming up in the things that I'm monitoring are those words that I just mentioned: crisis, chaos, disruption, right? It's not really a great, sort of dynamic that we're seeing right now. So I do think that associations need to play a stronger role in that. And particularly, we did not get into specific issues within the report, and that was intentional because we didn't want to narrow the conversation down to it's just about this or just about that. This is about broad-based board performance, and really broad-based performance of the whole governing system, if you will, if you include all the stakeholders in that process. So association boards, as human systems navigating or stewarding human systems into the future, those human systems aren't just the association, they are the industries and professions and the overlapping connections that they have with other industries and professions, right? No association is entirely on its own. There's other organizations in adjacent spaces, other entities out there. So boards have a much bigger responsibility than just the specific legalities and fiduciary issues of their own organization. Their work has ripple effects. It has direct and indirect consequences for other aspects of what's happening in their fields, and therefore it also extends more broadly beyond that. So I think that we need our boards to think about those responsibilities. And so even though our recommendations are very specific to things like getting out of the elections business and changing composition and other things that are may feel more association specific, the implications are much more significant than that when you are looking at an issue like artificial intelligence, which certainly I've spent a lot of time writing about and talking about over the last many years, which is an issue that not only affects the association but also affects the industry or profession and affects society at large. Or climate issues, which are increasingly becoming a question in this environment right now. All the follow-on consequences of a degrading and declining climate that our organizations are going to face, and many of them are specifically financial and legal as well. Or more broadly, the issues around how political division and the decline of democracy are going to affect our all of our fields, right, and our country as a whole and our world. So there is a need for boards to be looking at those issues and many others that are out there. And so the recommendations are intended to get them into a place where they have the capacity and have the right approach to be able to deal with any issue that they might be facing, because they have to be able to deal with a variety of issues. And this, by the way, is not unique in many ways to associations, because other kinds of boards are also in this space, other nonprofit boards, corporate boards, and other company boards. What's different, I think, for associations from some of the others is that associations remain a place that is really about unifying diverse groups of people around a variety of very important issues, because people are brought there because of their professional connections by and large. There are different kinds of associations, of course, but the vast majority are about professional connections, whether it's a profession or an industry. So we need to build that capacity for boards to be effective across these different issues. And I believe the 9 recommendations will help us and help boards and associations get to that place.
Along those same lines, Jeff, How do you see the FAB report connecting with the larger questions of civil society and trust in our institutions today?
Yeah, it's again, it's such an important issue, and I think recently I've seen some research put out by independent sector about trust in nonprofit organizations, and that number is relatively high. 57%, I believe, is the number of people say they trust. But here's the thing about that. My understanding of that research, because I've observed it, and it's been the same number, I believe, for the last couple of years at that same 57% level. A lot of that is really focused on social sector nonprofits, right? So cause-related nonprofits where people have trust. I'm not sure that in the association community, we are really able to one-for-one say that 57% of people say they have trust in nonprofit organizations, therefore they trust in us. Because I do think that there are many people out there unfamiliar with what associations do, who regard associations largely as special interest lobbying for their particular group, the particular group that they represent. And there is some truth to that, but you and I, as people who have been involved in associations for a long time, know also what associations do that is very important to society. So let's just take an issue like artificial intelligence for a moment and say that, artificial intelligence right now, what we see happening around us is a growing convergence between the government view of AI and the Silicon Valley or the tech community view of AI. And that is not necessarily great for society because they seem to be much more focused on advancing business interests through quote unquote innovation rather than protecting humanity, basically putting in place the necessary regulations and protections to ensure that people are not adversely affected or harmed by artificial intelligence. So I think when government and business begin to converge in their interests, we need organizations like associations that can look at the bigger picture and say, you know what, we are part of civil society and we must increase the trust in our institution. I see associations in this decade and going forward as essential societal institutions that can be about bringing people together around big issues. And even if we have disagreements, we can find common ground on that. That's why I think the solidarity that we talk about, that I've talked about in this conversation with regard to the report, is so important because we need to find ways to model that solidarity in a variety of areas. We just can't continue to say, well, there's both sides, there's two sides to every issue. On some issues, there are not two sides. On some issues, there's only one side. And again, AI is a good example of that. The only side that I think we should be really advancing is a human first way of looking at AI. So, and again, that's not limited to AI. There are other issues as well, like climate and other areas where we do need to say, you know what, there's one way forward on this. And that is about defending humanity, defending our shared humanity, protecting people, not inflicting harm, trying our very best to do everything we can to set the right approach and the right tone and the right practice for how we move forward. So I do believe that our report, with its comprehensive view of what boards should be about, their purpose, the work that they do, the way that they are composed, the way that they relate to staff, the way that presiding officers take responsibility for performance, the way that directors take personal responsibility for their performance, the way chief staff executives work with their boards, the way that senior management works with the board as well, the way that other contributors are supporting the board. We look comprehensively across a lot of different issues in this report that all go to one idea, which is effective board stewardship under very difficult circumstances. And that's at the specific level of the association, but it also has far-reaching implications beyond that for industries, professions, our society, and our world.
Jeff, as we wrap up here, are there any last words you'd like to give the community?
I would love for people to download the FAB report. I can say that you can find it at fabreport.online. That's fabreport.online. You can get directly to a place where you can find the report. You can read it online in a flipbook version or download a PDF. And I hope that you will do that as soon as possible. And as I said earlier, please email me at jeff@foresightfirst.io with any questions, or if you would like to talk about it. I'm happy to provide any support that I can to assist you with putting the report into action and also helping you navigate its content. So I hope that people will read it and be in touch and start working on this. And I hope that you'll join our FAB Community Dialogue meetings that are coming up in September through the end of the year. We will conclude our project in December, but we will have ongoing FAB Community Dialogue meetings on LinkedIn or on Zoom, but we also have the group on LinkedIn. So you can join the LinkedIn group and join our Zoom meetings in September, October, November, and December. And let us know if you have interest in doing that. Just email me and I can get you connected to that.
Hey, one more time, Jeff, what's that link so they can download the report?
It's fabreport.online.
Okay, great. We'll do that. Jeff, thank you once again for sharing your time and your insights with us in the community. The Future of Association Boards Community Dialogue Report really isn't just research. It's an urgent invitation for boards, executives, and stakeholders to step into the future with open eyes and stronger resolve. If associations are to remain vital in an age of disruption, their boards must be willing to challenge the assumptions, embrace foresight, and commit willingly to challenging old assumptions. I encourage everyone listening to read the report, reflect deeply, and most importantly, act. As Jeff reminds us, the future isn't something we wait for, it's something we create starting today. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, friends. From Association Futures Podcast, this is Michael Butera. We'll see you soon. Have a great and wonderful day. Read that report.